welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. We're reading through the transcript. California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez on trial for the second time for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. We are comparing and contrasting the first trial. Right now, we are going through the testimony. We're in the state's case, part 38, and we're in the testimony of Dr. Roger McCarthy. He is the mechanical engineer, not a biomechanical engineer, but he's speaking about the injuries to the bodies, which doesn't make sense that he does not have the expertise to do that. I went over that in the last episode, kind of the compare and contrast different, what biomechanical engineers do versus mechanical engineers. Mechanical engineers deal with machines, engines, things like that. Biomechanical engineers deal with how things affect the body, the forces of, physics and how that affects the body. So that is a real big difference. So this guy is their witness, the state's apparently their star witness because he's the last one on the stand. Right before him was Dr. Robert Lawrence, who was the ME, or rather, he's a forensic pathologist. He is not the ME who did the autopsies. So that was interesting that they didn't bring back that ME who did the actual autopsies and rather had someone else do it. And then this guy, he's with that failure analysis company who he created all these diagrams that Dr. Robert Lawrence talked about and said that they are inaccurate. And now they're going through, or well, they just went through a bunch of images and we completed on direct all the images and diagrams that he created. And now we're about to start with cross-examination. I think it's going to be fun. Probably, let's see who's up first. Oh, Mr. Gessler for Lyle is going to be up first for testimony. FYI, this particular witness is on the stand for quite some time, so there's going to be several parts to his testimony, but I think it's going to get interesting now that we've got cross-examination. So let us get started. Please hit the like button and let's go. All right, so the court says, okay, and the following proceedings were held in open court outside the presence of the jury. The court says, in the trial, the witness is on the witness stand out of the presence of the jury. Did they not? Oh, the jury's not out yet. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought I read, but it didn't make sense. Okay, sorry. The court says, in the trial, the witness is on the stand. Everyone is present. People have completed their direct examination, so we'll now go to cross-examination. We'll have the jury come out, please. And the jury enters the courtroom. The following proceedings were held. The court says the jury is back. We'll now resume with cross-examination. Mr. Gessler says, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Gessler says, good morning, Dr. McCarthy. Good morning. I'm not going to question you on the charts and graphs here, so we can take that down for a moment. And you probably won't even need your computer open there. I want to ask you a little bit about your military career, Dr. McCarthy. I take it you served in Vietnam? Oh, no. How many years were you on active duty in the military? I was only on active duty for a portion of the year to do my officer's basic training school. And when was that? 1973. So you were not a career Army officer at any time? Oh, no. And your ordinance that you've talked about, that came through your ROTC, your reserve training? No, my officer's basic branch school was in ordinance. Oh, this, you said 1973. Yes. And this was an ROTC officer? No, I had already been commissioned. I had to come on active duty to become branch qualified. All officers are associated with the military branch, and mine was ordnance. Well, your ROTC commission came when you graduated from college, didn't it? That's correct. And at that time that you graduated from college, you had not been on active duty in the Army at any time, had you? Just basic training. Basic training consists of what, 12 weeks at a time? 8 weeks? Something like that. So the basic training was basic infantry training, basic officer training, but most of it was, I think, what you would associate what I would call infantry training. An ROTC officer goes through what? The actual recruiting through basic training, doesn't he? You qualify on a range, you do some marching, you do some running, you do some, I've never heard that word. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. And all those types of things? Yes. And that's in a company of what? A couple of hundred men? Yeah, 120. It's learning how to be a soldier? That is correct. And that was what you had done by the time you had got your commission after ROTC classes. That's correct. So then the first time that you spent more than a couple of months on an army base was when you went for you said your basic training? Yeah, my branch school. So your branch school was in ordnance. Correct. That lasted what, 2 months, 3 months? 3 months. So 12 weeks? Yes. And again, that's group training, isn't it? We're trained as a class. As a class. You were part of a class that went through that ordnance school. Correct. And how many were in your class? 70 total, divided into two sections, 35. 35 in each section? Yes. And that's what you did for 3 months, was you went as part of this section of 35 men and women to ordnance school. Correct. And you all did pretty much the same thing. Exactly the same thing. That's the way the Army does it, isn't it? Yes. And after that 3 months, by the way, you said there was some shotgun testing going on at Aberdeen while you were there? Yes. Aberdeen. That's where you went for your ordnance? Basic training school, yes. You didn't take part in that shotgun testing, did you? No. That's just something that was going on at another part of the base. Research ongoing there, but not from you. That is correct. Now this is where he's going through all of his, that resume that I actually was quite impressed by. He is going to be breaking this down and picking it apart. So should discredit him right off the bat. So not from you. That's correct. So after you graduated along with the other 69 people, I take it from that branch, that's my memory. It was approximately 70. But you all graduated at the same time? Yes. After having done basically the same thing? Correct. And then you got an assignment for the next couple of months of your active duty, did you? No, they didn't have any slots for us, so they sent us all home. So that was it? That was it. That's bizarre. And your total regular Army training then would have been that 3 months at that time, and then just did you ever go into the regular Army as a career at any time? Oh, no. Then after that, I take it you had a reserve commitment to fulfill. That's correct. And your reserve commitment was a couple of weeks of summer camp each year. Each year, yes. Along with all the other reservists who had been schooled in ordnance. School in anything, but yes, ordnance too. And you and the other 69 people who graduated with you would go do your 2 weeks at some army base around the country? I don't mean to imply they all went home. Some of those guys were career. You weren't. I was not. So whatever was left of the ROTC reservists, they also went out of these 2 week military trainings each summer, unless they had a mobilization designation spot. And did you ever get mobilized, or I was eventually what they call Mob Mobdized? I don't know. So that means mobilized, designated, mobdized, mobdized. That's correct. So you were never mobilized, in fact. No, I was on Mobdez for 4 years. There was no national emergency, so I was never mobilized. How long did you stay in the reserves? My commitment was for 8 years. I was honorably discharged in 1980. So you did your 8th year commitment and retired? Was discharged. You did not then seek to keep a reserve career as some people do? Some people do, and I did not. This is an option that was available, wasn't it, to stay in the reserves if you wanted to beyond your 8 years? In theory, yes. In particularity, practicality. Oh my God, I can't think of words. In practicality, no. During that period of time, they were decreasing the size of the regular army, and reserve slots did and should go to the regular army officers first. So the regular army officers are doing regular army duty, aren't they? No. Well, yes. When they're in the regular army, but when there's a reduction in force, people with the regular army commission, see, I had a reserve commission. If you graduate from West Point, you get a regular army position and they get first choice at reserve slots, which they should. They're more highly trained. So, after your 8 years, you did not have any further association with the United States Army Reserves. Not as a drilling officer, that is correct. And when the Gulf War broke out, did you go over to Kuwait? No. Or to Iraq? No. Sorry, I don't know what my dog is barking at, but she's being a little butt. So he did not go to Kuwait or Iraq. Or were you called into any of the theaters of combat during the Gulf War? Not combat. We dispatched a team to Kuwait for the oil well fires. Did you go? No. So, in essence, Doctor, it's true that you have never been in combat then. That is correct. And you've never personally fired a weapon in a combat situation. That's correct. Doctor, you've told us about failure analysis group. There is a failure group, so failure analysis is a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary, correct. The failure group that has the office in Poland. Yes. There are failure group offices. Actually, there are subsidiaries of the company chartered in the Netherlands, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the failure group. Gdansk. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. Maybe the G is silent. Dansk. That's where Lisa gained fame. I have no idea what they're talking about. This is not something I recall from my childhood. It is Poland, yes. So it used to be called Danzig back in the German days, or do you know? You have me there. Objection, relevance. Mr. Gessler says it's a seaport. Objection, irrelevant. Overruled. You can answer the question. The witness says, I have not been there. I'm sorry. Mr. Gessler says, you've never been there? I have not. Even as chief executive officer of the company, you have never visited that particular branch? That is correct. That was a good way to kind of bring that out. Did they help you in any way in these exhibits that you prepared here, these angles and things? No. They never sent you any faxes or anything like that on it? That's correct. You just mentioned your office there to show us how big your company is? Objection calls for speculation as to why the question was asked. Overruled. The witness says, I talked about Dansk or Gdansk, whatever, because I was asked about it. Mr. Gessler says, but it had no relevance to any of the work that you've done in this case, did it? Objection, argumentative, overruled. They did not, the witness says, they did not participate in any of the work on this case. That is true. Mr. Gessler says, now, I think you mentioned you have how many PhDs in your company? 80 or 90, some odd. I'd have to look at a personnel roster to get an exact count. Have you been increasing blah, Have you been increasing the size of your PhDs in the last year? We've been both up and down. I think the count is both decreased and increased, and that's why I'm uncertain. We're certainly in the high recruiting mode. Well, in March of this year, you had 70 PhDs, didn't you? Whatever the count was in March was the count in March. It's been fluctuating as we've been in merger discussions with a couple of companies and we spun off a couple units, and I just don't know the exact count as a function of time. Okay, that's a roundabout way of I don't want to answer your question, so I'm not going to answer your question. You said whatever the count is. That doesn't provide us any information. You have to file a form with the Securities and Exchange Commission each year, don't you? That's correct. And you're responsible for that as Chief Executive Officer. Yes. And in that form that you filed for the end of December 1994 for the fiscal year, you told the United States government you had 70 PhDs, didn't you? I don't recollect what the count was in 74, but whatever the count was on that form. Not 74, 94, last year. That was accurate. You said whatever the count was. Was it 70? It could have been. I think we have been as low as 70 in the past, yes. So that fluctuates from time to time. Yes. At any rate, doctor, how many of these PhDs did you involve in this work that you brought to the jury here? I don't know who Devender involved, so that must be the guy or personnel that was the go-between. I don't know who Devender involved, but basically, I'm the only one. I'm sorry. Basically, one. I'm the only one that I'm specifically aware of. So he's the only doctor or doctorate in this field looking at the case. So he didn't have any other doctors in his field or any peers looking at this. Um, so that's kind of concerning. Just to, fact check or, see if there were any issues in his diagrams. Sler asks, so this mostly is your work, isn't it? In fact, it's all your work. I'm responsible for all of this, yes. And it was not participated in by these other PhDs and members of your group. Fundamentally, that is correct. You told us about them also just to show us how big your company is. Objection calls for speculation as to why the question was asked. Overruled. The witness says, I think I was asked specifically, but I'll have to go back and check the record. Mr. Gessler says, they had nothing to do with your preparation of the exhibits that you have shown the jury. Essentially, that is correct. And the cadaver lab that you have back in Pennsylvania, yes. How did you involve them in this work? I did not. So they weren't involved either. They were not. And you have no medical degree, do you? I do not. Nor any work as a criminalist. Not much. Have you ever worked as a professional criminalist for a law enforcement agency anywhere? No. Ever worked at an FBI lab as a criminalist? Or never worked at an FBI lab as a criminalist. That is correct. Nor in a police agency lab as a criminalist. That is correct. Now, in 1993, your company suffered certain reversals, didn't it? Let me put it this way. Did you tell your stockholders in 1993 that there was a loss because companies were not using expert witnesses as much anymore? I can't remember if we lost money for all of 1993, but certainly that time frame was a tough year. But the explanation was far more complex than that. One explanation you gave to the stockholders was that large companies were not using expert witnesses as much anymore because they were cutting back on the use of their money, isn't it? I was at a stockholders meeting and I don't remember explaining it that way. I did explain that companies were using outside experts less because of the economic situation. And you were one of those outside experts that you were talking about. The firm as a whole, I never see any change really in my in my personal workload, but the firm as a whole certainly did. Dr. McCarthy, in 1993, your focus became getting new business for the firm, didn't it? More so than the past, yes. And that was what you were presenting to the stockholders, that now your primary function was to bring in new business. Get us into new business areas, and certainly be much more involved in the business generation process, yes. And that's what you're continuing to do, isn't it? That occupies more of my time now than it used to, yes. Again, in 1994, you told your stockholders that you were coming up with new strategies to try to get new business. That and continuing to work the acquisition of companies with a like minded technical focus. In other words, the business end of the thing. Well, Rainmaker. It's got to be business related to the technical. But you've got your accent, your emphasis in bringing in the new business so that your firm can continue to show a good profit. I am more involved in that than I previously was. That is correct. So previously, General Motors and some of these other Fortune top 50 companies, they provided over half of your business, didn't they? No single company did, but certainly more than half our business was concentrated in the Fortune top 50. True. Talking about like General Motors, Suzuki, and then there's no audible response from the witness. Mr. Gessler says you have to answer out loud. He says Suzuki is not in the top 50. They're one of the companies that you work for. And that's true. General Motors and Ford and Chrysler, the automotive business was a big mainstay. The insurance business was a big mainstay. So you work primarily for the big product plaintiffs, the car manufacturers, the truck manufacturers, the recreation vehicles, all-terrain vehicles, that type of thing. I personally probably worked primarily in relationship to those companies, yes. And that's who you've primarily testified for, isn't it? I would suspect over my career, the majority of my testimony outings have been on behalf of manufacturers as you've characterized. Now, your degrees. We're getting to his credibility and starting to break apart and tear down his credibility a little bit by little bit, and I'm here for it. So I'm enjoying watching the show. Now your degrees. You have one in philosophy? Correct. And what is that? Medieval philosophy? And that was my specialty, yes, 6th through 12th century. Although interesting, that did not provide much help in reconstructing the crime scene, did it? You didn't go out to any crime scene as part of that, getting that degree, did you? No, but that's quite all right. It didn't provide any. For your degrees at Michigan and MIT, did you ever go to a crime scene as part of getting those degrees? A murder scene? No. So he's never been to a crime scene. So strike one. And your thesis that you worked on getting that special degree from MIT, what did you call that? The engineer's degree? A degree of professional mechanical engineers. So the professional engineer's degree. The thesis that you wrote for that didn't have anything to do with a crime scene or work as a criminalist, did it? It did not. Doctor, how many homicide scenes have you ever visited? Personally? Personally. I can't think of a scene that I have personally visited that I ultimately concluded was a homicide. Well, certainly you've never been to anywhere where the deceased were still present, such as are portrayed in your work here. That's correct. And doctor, how many autopsies have you ever visited where somebody had died from gunshot wounds? I have never been at an autopsy. So he's never been to a crime scene, never been to an autopsy, and therefore never seen a shotgun wound on a deceased body. So you've never been at an autopsy of any kind. That is correct. Doctor, how many wounds have you ever seen on a human being? Live? Live. Gunshot wounds. As I sit here, I don't recollect ever dealing with one live. So you've seen no live gunshot wounds and you've never attended an autopsy. That is correct. In work for the case, then, in preparing these workups that you've given us, did you consult with any pathologists or coroners before you came to your conclusions as to the shot sequence? Outside of reading autopsy materials that were already done in the case, no. So he's only basing his opinions based on the doctor's opinions, the ME who did the autopsy and Dr. Golden was the one who did the autopsy, and then Dr. Lawrence who testified in this trial as to the findings of the autopsy, even though he wasn't there. But reading the autopsy reports is not consulting with the doctor who did them, is it? I wouldn't define it as so. That's why I answered your question as I did. So the answer is no. You have never, before you came to these conclusions as to the shot sequence, you did not consult with any coroners or pathologists or medical doctors. No. And did you consult with any professional criminalists before coming to this conclusion of the sequence? By that I mean criminalists who work in FBI labs or police labs. No. Basically, you did this work on your own without consulting with the other professionals in your outfit, and without consulting with coroners or pathologists, and without consulting with any professional criminalists. Is that a fair statement? No, Mr. Devender of our biomechanics group was invaluable in assisting this reconstruction. So, well, then why isn't he testifying? Christian Devender? Mr. Devender Grewal. Devender Grewal. All right. He's not a doctor, is he? He is not a medical doctor, that is correct. He's not a criminalist, to your knowledge, is he? He is not. He's never worked for the FBI or any police criminal labs who do this thing for a living? No. Doctor, you told us about your experience with weapons. I think a couple of days ago, you say you own 400 weapons? Several hundred. I don't know if I'm up to 400, but certainly more than two. I think I haven't counted them. That's a little insane. Whatever happened to this guy? Did anybody keep tabs on him? Because that's a little insane to have that much, to have that many, to have that many weapons. This makes, I mean, that's kind of psychotic, in my opinion. He says several hundred. Um, where was I? So, doctor, you told us you had experience with weapons. I think a couple of days ago you said you own 400 weapons. Several hundred. I don't know if I'm up to 400, but certainly more than two. I think I haven't counted them. And you mentioned that you had testified, you believe, as an expert probably 100 times. Ballpark in my career, yes. And how many of those times have been as an expert in ballistics, doctor? I don't recollect ever being so designated by a court. Exactly. So stop talking about ballistics because you're not qualified in it. So thank you for making that point. In other words, you've never testified as an expert in ballistics until this trial. I guess if you had asked me after this trial, was I qualified as an expert, that I would hesitate to say. I wouldn't make that representation, but I don't remember ever being specifically qualified in that area. So you don't consider the testimony that you've been giving here basically that of ballistics? I believe it involves out of ballistics and have more background than the average person. What constitutes an expert decision the court makes, not that I make. Well, let me ask you about some of the terms you used in your testimony, Doctor. You mentioned juxtaposition. That means how a couple of objects are placed next to each other, doesn't it? Can be that, yes. That's the definition of that, isn't it? One of them. That's how you used it, wasn't it? That's which I specifically used it. Continue questions. Go ahead. We want to bring some of the engineering terms you've used down to those of lawyers so that we can understand them. So I don't know what that I don't know that that's an engineering term. What about angularity? You've used that word, haven't you? Again, I don't have a specific recollection. These were all the big words that he kept throwing around in his word salads on direct. Well, did you talk about angularity of the wounds when you were explaining your diagrams here to the jury? I may have, but not. Angularity just means an angle. Actually, that might not even be a word. It might not. It's got a lot of syllables. Basically, it means the angle of something, doesn't it? If that's what you used. If that's what I used, that's what I was trying to communicate. That word sounds awful to me when I hear it back. I don't know why. What about directionality? Again, just direction. Just direction plus a couple of syllables. Yes. He's making my point that he was just using big words in his word salads, trying to make it sound like he was all experty, but he's really not. So when you use the word directionality, didn't you mean direction? Yes, I would assume so. Again, I don't have a specific recollection of using that word, but if I did, that's what I was trying to communicate. When you used the word bias in association with these wounds, it just means the angle of the wound too, doesn't it? That means the existence of an angle, non-parallelism. That's a hard word to say. Which means there's an angle. It's not a straight line, in other words. That's not right. Usually, when I'm talking about bias, that means an angle relative to some axis, like two parallel lines do not have a bias, but when the lines are not parallel to one another, that has a bias. All angles go off from an axis. All angles are defined by two intersecting rays that are non-parallel. Usually, when I was using the term bias, I was talking about the direction of one feature, its major axis relative to some other bias or some other axis. You've talked about wound geometry and geometry of a wound. That again just means the angle, doesn't it? No. Well, I would have been making a reference to angle, but my recollection of talking about wound geometry was, in part, also the shape, an oval wound, being more indicative of a bias than a circular wound that is straight on. So, geometry basically means where objects are placed in relation to one another using mathematics to arrive at that. The relative positions or the shapes, I mean geometry, is just a study of physical properties or physical properties of objects and what can be told about them. And those objects are inanimate, aren't they? Geometric theorems don't care whether the objects are inanimate or not. They care whether they're stationary. We can talk about instantaneous geometric position, meaning where somebody is right at the very instant that something happens. That means at some point in time, the objects are in these relationships to one another. All that means they can be in motion. So that's what you meant when you said geometry that you've used for wounds or for your pictures here is the relationship of objects. The physical relationship of objects and people, yes. Now, did you use mathematical formulas to work out this geometry? No, the data does not permit exact position. Geometry is a branch of mathematics, isn't it? Yes, and if you have precise positions and shapes of objects, you can do very precise calculations. So when you use the term geometry in this courtroom, then you were not referring to mathematical calculations that you had done? That is correct. There just isn't enough detailed data for that. Wow. So you meant geometry simply in the sense of, as I say, where objects were in relation to one another. Yes. Doctor, I take it then there's no mathematical work that we can look at that you've done here, no calculations? No, there's just not enough detail. So this is all an assumption. All of his diagrams, he's just he's speculating because there's just not enough detail. They just don't have the information that they need to do a precise reconstruction of this. So here we are. As you were going through these different shots that you've presented to the jury here, did you make notes of the process in doing that? No, generally, I don't make notes. You don't make notes? Correct. Your memory is good. Well, that's a little strong, but if I sit down and work with it, it's good enough, yes. In other words, I can leave it for a week if I sit there and work with it. So for things you've worked on with your memory is good, good enough. You've even testified that people at your work think you have a photographic memory because it's so good, haven't you? Did I say that? Do people at work think you have a photographic memory because your memory is so good? I've heard that said, but I can't imagine saying that. But you've heard that said at work, you mean? Yes. But you can't imagine yourself saying that in the courtroom? Well, I guess it's sort of embarrassing to hear back if I said that. Doctor, as you went through these different shot sequences, did you rule out certain other possibilities? I didn't rule them out. Let me put it this way. Some things I did rule out. Lots of times I only thought them less probable. And when you thought something was less probable, did you make any notes as you were going through this process of probability? No. As I indicated, I didn't. So that was also, again, in your mind, in your head, that you remembered what you had done and went from there. No, I wouldn't make that representation to you. I mean, it didn't strike me. I wasn't writing a book. So I wasn't trying to sit there and reconstruct every bit of thinking that I did. I was just trying to understand the geometry as best I could from the remaining evidence. And it wasn't important to me to say, well, I went down this path for a while and decided that doesn't make any sense. But why wouldn't you? Okay. The geometry, meaning the relative positions of things. Positions and angles, things of that nature, yes. As you were doing that, then you didn't, as you say, make notes of any particular angle that you might have come across as being probable. Well, ultimately, all these charts reflect some sort of angulation. There's some geometry depicted, but I didn't try and write a chronicle of every dead end I hit and the reasoning process. Over how long a period of time did you work on this project? The better part of a year, I think. And I take it that wasn't all day, every day for a year? Oh, heaven forbid, no. So it would be 6 hours here, and a month would go by, and then you'd spend another 8 hours or something of that nature, or 2 hours here or something of that nature. It was intermittent, yes. So when you got back to it, you didn't have any notes then to review of where you had left off before. Is that correct? That is correct. You just kind of worked back into it and tried to pick up where you had left off. No, that's not the way I approach an investigation. I prefer to come back to the evidence on several iterations as much as possible without the basis or without the bias of the first look. And I just get more comfortable with the conclusion you can't ever reset your mind to zero, but when several different runs of the evidence produce a similar thinking pattern, I'm more comfortable with that. That's when it's a similar thinking pattern or a distinct thinking pattern you're having to rely on your memory. Not exactly. See, I'm not trying to replicate history. What I'm trying to do is figure out what happened. So if I come back for 2 months later and I look at something somewhat differently, whether I recall having seen that feature before or not is not as important as finally seeing that feature and understanding it. Okay, buddy. But you don't have any notes to go by as to where you left off. That is, as to what your thinking had been the first time through. Let's just say you did one of these or started one of those shots in March and you didn't get back to it until April. You had to rely on your memory as to what you had done, what you had ruled out or not ruled out in March. Isn't that true? To the extent that I made a reliance on my previous analysis, yes. Now, doctor, you told us that you fired this Mossberg shotgun. Yes, this one. And you did that at a series of targets? Yes. And how many targets did you fire at this particular uh, case? I made copies. How many of them were there? You tell me. A dozen. I have to go back and count them, and unfortunately, they won't be here for another hour. What won't be here? My targets. They're between San Francisco and Los Angeles. You didn't bring them with you? I didn't. Mr. Devender was supposed to bring them and his plane got fogged in. So those targets show the work that you did with the shotgun and the Fiachi ammunition and the Mossberg. And other ammunition, yes. And you need them to look at in order to see what work was done on them. To give you a precise count of the number of targets I shot, it was more than a dozen, but I don't recollect how many specifically. You don't remember how many more than a dozen? That's correct. Do you remember what ranges you shot at? 6 and 12 feet. Did you shoot at any intermediary ranges? That is 8 feet, 10 feet? No. So all of your shots were at 6 feet and 12 feet. That's correct. Do you remember how many were at 6 feet? Oh, I guess 6 or 8, something like that, would be my best recollection. Well, we don't want you to guess, but that's your best recollection? That's why I'd like to have the target count. Whatever it is, it is. Again, with the whatever it is. That's not an answer. So at 12 feet, what's your best recollection for how many targets you shot there? Again, ballpark half a dozen. And that was your effort to determine scatter. It wasn't it. That is a pattern. No, at the end of that effort, I determined that I couldn't reliably use scatter. That's different. At the beginning of the pattern, that's what you were trying to find out? At the beginning of it, my hope was that using the same weapon and the same ammunition, I would get a consistent rate of spread at different ranges so I could use a spread of the shot pattern as a reliable indicia of a range. And when did you do these tests? A few months ago. Did you do these tests before you talked on the phone to Mr. Khan, Ms. Nahira, and Mr. somebody? I can't pronounce it. Mr. Kristula, we'll say, and myself. Oh, yes. And you recall that we asked you about those tests. I specifically asked you about those tests. I do recall some discussion of them, yes. And at that time, did you tell me that the shots at 12 feet gave a pattern of about 5 inches? Whatever. I mean, I'm sure I indicated I didn't have the pattern in front of me, but when you pressured me, I gave you my best recollection. I don't recall that that was my best recollection at the time. Whatever it was, it was. Oh my God. Again, whatever it was doesn't help us here because you're the witness testifying. Mr. Khan says objection argumentative, motion to strike, and the court says overruled because he's getting tired of it too. Mr. Gessler says you realize that that conversation that we had was being tape recorded? Oh, yes. And we told you that it was being tape recorded for the benefit of everyone so that we could look back and see what you said, didn't we? Most definitely. And you had no objections to it being tape recorded. Well, I didn't even think about it. I didn't think I got a vote. Well, you didn't, but you didn't express any objection even without your vote, did you? The witness shook his head. Now, Would listening to that portion of the conversation refresh your recollection as to what you told us? It would, if you wish. Well, I do. I don't have a better recollection of the tape. You can just play the tape. If you heard the tape, that would assist you in recognizing your voice, wouldn't it? I presume it's my voice. Whatever I said, I said. Again, you said whatever you said, you said. We have to know what you said. I can't say what you said and have it in evidence. We have to hear it from you. Would listening to the tape help you in that? I can't independently recollect, so I would have to see a transcript or hear the tape, either one. Mr. Gessler says, I'll be glad to play the tape for you. This does not have to be taken down by the reporter. This is simply to refresh the witness's recollection. Let me get through these high-tech things here. The tape is played. High-tech things, I'm sorry, but it's probably just like a little tape deck or something. Mr. Gessler says, Doctor, were you able to hear that tape recording? Yes. And did you state in it that at 12 feet you got scatters that went to 5-ish inches? 5-ish inches, yes. And then did you state at 6 feet that it would be roughly half of that? It would be half the interval, yes. And when you told us that you didn't say anything about the patterns not being reliable, did you? I don't remember what we discussed on that aspect. Would you like to hear the whole tape? If you wish me to answer questions about what we discussed, that or a transcript, well, I have a transcript, but I think the tape is better. Over the lunch hour, would it assist you in listening to that tape? If you wish me to answer specific questions about the conversation, yes. And let me just ask you a couple of more questions on this line. Doctor, there was one shot. I think you called it shot number 3 that went through the French door, wasn't there? Yes, without hitting anybody. Correct. And in your view, that was what you called a tight pattern. Well, reasonably no. I mean, yes. Reasonably so. I mean, yes. That's one reason you felt it didn't hit anybody was that it was all pretty compact when it went through the glass. Reasonably grouped as opposed to evidencing as a disturbance, yes. And did you measure that defect there, that hole, to see what its diameter was? Oh, yes, but yeah, there's a good photograph of the hole. I know there's a good photograph, but did you measure it? I looked at the photograph with the measure in it. I didn't measure it independent of the windows. I did study the photograph with the measurement in it. And what did you determine to be the pattern for that? I would have to look at the photo again. I didn't make any use of that dimension. You didn't make any use of that dimension? You did not try to estimate the distance the shooter would have been from that glass that was broken? I would have liked to do that and had that shotgun test come out reliably in terms of the spread rate. I would have, but I did not for that reason. You would have liked to do that? What stopped you? From shot to shot, the variation of the spread of pellets of the shotgun varied so much that I couldn't have come in. The range spread of the potential distance indicated by that pattern would have been so large it wouldn't have been in any utility in my reconstruction. Word salad. Doctor, when I asked you that question in our phone call, did you say that you could calculate the dispersion pattern if you wanted to and come up with a distance and you just didn't find it useful? I think I told you you'd have to calculate a distribution of dispersion, and you're right, the distribution would be so wide I didn't find it useful. That could be calculated. So you didn't say it would be so wide it wouldn't be useful, did you, doctor, when you talked on the phone? I don't recollect specifically what we discussed. Let me ask you another one. But let me finish. All right. We did not have a conversation where I communicated that there was a reliable mechanism to determine range based on shot pattern, and I just didn't do it. That conversation we didn't have. Did we have a conversation in which you said I could give it to any expert and they could come up with that distance if they wanted to? They could come up with the distance based on the distribution from my shots if they wanted to. They just couldn't defend it. I could do that. I could draw you a bell curve and say 1% of the shots are this wide and 1% of the shots are this wide, and the distribution would be functioned like this. And we know the range is somewhere in there. And that's fine, doctor. But when we talked on the phone and we just played the tape recording there, you said that at 12 feet, it was about 5-ish inches, didn't you? Yes, that was my recollection. That was your answer, wasn't it? Yes, it was. And at that time, you didn't say, but gee, that 5-ish inches, it could be 2 inches and it could be 8 inches, and it's just of no value at all, did you? I don't think I said those words, but you didn't even say words close to that. Your Honor, may the witness finish his answer. The witness says, I would have to listen to the whole tape. I just cannot believe. I mean, there's just no way that I communicated to you that that was a reliable mechanism to determine range. That is the whole reason I embarked on this research and couldn't make it work. Mr. Gessler says, yes. Doctor, when you said that at the 12 feet range, it's 5-ish inches, and that at 6 feet, it's half that, that it's a simple mathematical calculation. You didn't say that this was invalid, did you? Again, I don't recollect exactly what I said, but generally, if you get a couple of points on a dispersion curve, you can extrapolate to all the intermediate ranges. I'm sure I communicated that. That's exactly what you said. You couldn't extrapolate from it. Generally, yes. And in this case, you said 5-ish inches for 12 feet, half that for 6 feet, and that you fired at least 6 shots at each of those distances. Isn't that correct? That is once again, I don't recollect saying that specifically in that recollection or in that conversation, but all of those things are true. I think I shot a half dozen at each. And you thought that you said was about a 5-inch pattern for 12 feet. 5-ish. I couldn't remember exactly what the dimensions were. 5-ish is 5-ish. 5-ish is not MIT term, is it? No. If I had the target, I would have put a ruler on it for you. So you just kind of guessed off the top of your head when we were having this phone conversation. I hope 5-ish didn't communicate 3 decimal points. What do you mean? Just that. I hope you didn't think I was saying 5.000 when I said 5 inches, 5-ish. I take it you did mean when you said 5-ish, you did mean in the vicinity of 5 inches, didn't you? Yes, as opposed to 2. Exactly. That was my recollection. When you were talking about the 6 feet, you were talking about half that, or around 2.5 inches, weren't you? Or, if it was 4, then 2 or whatever, half that was approximately. This is very confusing to me. And so to that extent, your test was valid, I take it. That is, you got the larger patterns at 12 feet and about half that at 6 feet. Isn't that true? Close. Well, that's what you told us, isn't it? Well, first of all, if you would have asked me, I would have told you that you're going to get a larger pattern at 12 feet than at 6 feet. And if you could have measured the same shot at 6 feet, you would see roughly it spread at whatever it was at 12 feet, barring small deviations due to imperfections in the pellets. Did you do a shot of that nature where you did the same shot and you measured it at 6 and 12 feet? No. I was concerned with interaction, with the target changing the spread for the second target. I tried it. Or I tried in my. That was the experiment that you did? I'm sorry? That was the experiment you did, checking 6 feet and 12 feet. I had to shoot them independent. I found I could not aim reliably through a number of targets back to back. So what you did was you bolted the shotgun, or you put it in a lathe or something to keep it absolutely steady, didn't you? No, that wouldn't realistically simulate a recoil absorption of a shooter. What I did was clamp a very a slight small Jorgensen hand screw clamp to the barrel, which registered in the front of the barrel precisely on my shooting bench, and then I seated myself, used my shoulder as the bench rest, and shot those so that my body motion would be consistent with a recoiling shooter, which nominally shouldn't affect the spread, but I wanted to make sure that to the extent that experimental variable was there, it was in my experiment. And then you put it back and did it the same way the second time. Then I put it back. I put a new target mounted at 12 feet, draw a bead, and do the same shot. Register the weapon on the front of the shooting bench so the initial position of my barrel started the same distance from the target. And there was the leg wound on Jose Menendez that you've described as being shot number 7. Do you recall that one? I recall shot number 7, yes. And did you measure the shot dispersion in that wound or the size of that wound? I don't recollect trying to make an exact measurement of the size of it, no. Did you try to estimate from the size of the pattern how far back the shooter might have been when that shot was delivered? No, that was the problem. I mean, if it was a 5-inch pattern, it would have been 12 feet, wouldn't it? Based on your own experiments, a 5-ish pattern, let's put it that way. I mean, no, that is the problem. First of all, I can hear just the objection if I said 5-ish, but Mr. Khan says, Your Honor, may the witness complete the answer. The court says, Why don't you answer the question? The witness says, No, you can't do that because if I had my 12-foot targets here, you'd see that some were bigger and some were smaller, and the range of size of shot at the same distance varied substantially. So that means that by trying to rely on the size of that shot pattern, what you are trying to do is say, Well, I know there's a distribution of ranges that may have accounted for this. Well, it was clear to me with my first dozen shots that the width of that distribution, particularly once I got the centroid defined, was going to be so big that it would be useless. I couldn't make that determination. So you mean at 6 feet, some shot patterns were bigger than they were at 12 feet. Is that true? No, you wouldn't see that kind of crossover. You wouldn't still see at 6 feet factors of 2 difference in the size of the shot. You mean 1 to 2 feet? Yes, that's a big difference. At 12 feet, it might be 4 to 5 inches. Whatever it was, I didn't attempt to measure it. It was a large distance in the size of distribution. There is some value in seeing how big the dispersion is as to an estimate of the distance away as to the shooter and longer, isn't it? Isn't there? What? Not much, because had I shot enough 12-footers and had I shot enough 6-footers, then you would begin to see at the tail end of the distribution some of the 12-footers would have been tighter than some of the 6-footers. Now what do I do? Mr. Gessler says, move to strike that entire answer as speculation. The court says sustained, that answer stricken. Mr. Gessler says, you did not fire more than 6 shots at 12 feet, did you, doctor? And that can be answered yes or no. I don't recollect. I may have shot more than 6 at 12 feet. I'd have to count the targets to answer precisely. This is very confusing. As a juror, I'd be lost in this conversation here. At any rate, of all the shots you did do, you did not get any 6 feet that were bigger than they were at the 12 feet, did you? I don't recollect seeing the pattern crossover on my 6 shots. That's correct. And how many 6 shots did you have available to you to take had you decided to do? You were limited to 12 rounds of Fiachi ammunition? Oh, no, I had a whole case. And how much is in a case? 200 rounds. and you fired 12 of those 200 rounds. Yes. All right. Your Honor, I really do need to go a little bit into the shotgun patterns that he does have with him, and apparently we can't do that. It's noon now, anyways. Can we take the noon break at this time? The court says we will take our recess. So that's where we will end here for today. And we'll come back after their lunch break for tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, let me know what you think of this case, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye now. That and continuing to work the acquisition of companies with a like-minded technical focus. In other words, Okay, my mic went out, so I don't know. I'm at 26:15 and I have to reread some of this because I don't know where my mic went out, but it's working now. So, all right, question. Let me back up. All right, so I would suspect over my career, the majority of my testimony outings have been on behalf of manufacturers as you've characterized. Now, your degrees, you have one degree in philosophy? Correct. And what is that? Medieval philosophy? You know what? I'm just going to stop.